Accountability has become one of the most misunderstood words in business. Many owners associate it with uncomfortable conversations, disciplinary meetings, or the correction of poor performers. But what if accountability isn't about confronting people at all? In this episode, we explore why the real issue is often a lack of clearly defined expectations, measurable outcomes, and consistent follow through. And to do this, I'm pleased to welcome back Jeff Carman with Elite BSC. Jeff, you staying dry down there in Tennessee?
Trying to, but it's pretty difficult, but we're doing okay down here.
I think we have a perpetual rainy season here in Ohio,
Yeah,
but good to see you again on the program and a good topic that we'll
yeah,
dig into. So if you're
yeah,
ready, I have a few questions for you.
absolutely.
All right, here's the first one. Talking about accountability, it's often has that negative connotation. Why do you think so many business owners and managers misunderstand what accountability really means or what it really is?
Yeah. So if you think about the word accountability and how it's used in the news all the time when something goes wrong. Somebody has to be held accountable. And so in that context, accountability almost always means punishment. And so that baggage gets pushed right into your business, and people know that word because of what they see. So maybe a way to redefine it, and this is maybe a way to think about it, is that accountability is knowing what success looks like before you start and then owning the result either way. In other words, it's not punitive, it's clarity. And so the problem in most BSCs isn't that the people don't care, it's that success was never clearly defined in the first place.
Okay, let's build on that. You say that the problem usually isn't the people, the lack of clear expectations, defined results, all that. So, what does effective accountability actually look like for field managers and directors on a day-to-day basis? If you were to peer in and see it, what would you expect?
Yeah, yeah. Most people are never told explicitly what success looks like. And so if you haven't defined that, it's kind of hard to hold people accountable to it, including ourselves. And so here's a key insight to think about is you can't measure outcomes directly. You can only manage the activities that produce them. And so I'll give you an example. You can't force a customer to stay with your company. Customer retention is the result of 100 smaller things that are done consistently over time. So what you can manage is the behaviors that go into retention. So how often your field leaders go to visit a site and how quickly complaints get resolved, or whether you have a real conversation with the customer on an ongoing basis. But we can have a tendency to set outcome goals without defining the daily and weekly activities that produce them. And so then when the outcome doesn't happen, we're kind of scratching our heads and saying, hey, I wonder why that didn't turn out. So the key here is define success and then create a roadmap to try to achieve it.
I know in a previous note we shared, you teach a simple framework, define, monitor, address. I heard the word define there a few times. How can owners use that approach to stop being the person who solves every problem and instead build a business that holds itself accountable? Talk about those three things.
Yeah, so on the define part is just really just having a conversation and putting it down on paper. Or maybe put it on paper and then have a conversation. What success looks like and how to measure it. This doesn't have to be a big long corporate document. It's probably a one pager that just defines for, let's say, an account manager, a field leader, or a recruiter on your HR team. It's just define that, make it clear and simple, and and then have a conversation. The conversation alone changes a lot of things for most people because they never have it. So that's the define. On the monitor piece, it's this idea of checking your dashboard regularly. Different metrics have different cadences. We talked in a previous uh, video about having a dashboard and checking different things along the way. So what's really nice is AI built dashboards are creating real opportunities for BSC. So BSC leaders are getting clarity around these lead indicators that lead to success for customer retention, for example. But here's a caution. If you haven't redefined accountability first, a dashboard feels like surveillance. And so field leaders are already associate accountability with punishment will see a tracking tool as big brother watching them. And so we got to get the culture right before we introduce the tools. When your team understands that accountability means shared success. A dashboard becomes a coaching tool and not a threat. And so that's the monitor piece. And then lastly, the address piece. The address has two sides, and we tend to forget this first side. The first side is this: when expectations are met, celebrate those outcomes. Recognition is a very powerful accountability tool. When things aren't going well, we need to start by asking two questions before we assume anything. The first one is, are our expectations correct? Did we set this person up to succeed? And then secondly, are there barriers or maybe misunderstandings that we haven't defined yet? And so the key here is to work together to solve the problem. I'll say this is interesting. Accountability is not something to do. Accountability is something to do with people, not something to do to people.
You mentioned surveillance, and I think that's a concern with many employees. Right now in the news, the flock cameras watching everybody is big, big news.
It
So
is.
no
Yeah.
one wants
Yeah.
to have their be under a microscope. Yeah.
That's right. That's right. Yeah.
So any final words to share before we close?
Well, I think we started out with, accountability, is it something that's maybe misunderstood? And I think there is a misunderstanding. So I think to start with, to separate accountability from punishment, they're definitely not the same thing. And so I like to use an analogy. I like to use analogies a lot. So think about this. A good shepherd doesn't use their staff to harm their sheep. He uses it to guide them. And that's really what accountability ought to feel like in your organization.